Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. What happens when a wife agrees to meet her husband's friend for a secret hookup, only to walk into a hotel room and find her husband sitting there with divorce papers and a recording of every message she sent? When I knocked on that hotel door expecting Lucas, I never imagined Garrett would open it with a laptop showing our entire text history and 3 witnesses waiting in the adjoining room. Now, standing in the office tower lobby with legal documents in my hands and my former in-laws watching, I realized the offer was never real. It was the trap that caught me. I woke up that Tuesday morning to an empty bed. Again. Garrett had been sleeping in the guest room for the past 2 weeks, claiming he needed better rest for his early morning meetings. I told myself it was temporary, that we were just going through a rough patch, that all marriages had these moments. But lying there alone, staring at the ceiling, I felt the familiar ache of loneliness settle in my chest. I found Garrett in the kitchen, already dressed in his grey suit, making coffee in that precise way he did everything. Measured, controlled, efficient. His blue travel mug sat on the counter next to the coffee maker. My red mug sat on the opposite counter, abandoned and empty. I noticed that. The distance between our mugs felt symbolic somehow. I said good morning. He nodded without looking at me and said morning. Just that one word. I asked if he wanted to have breakfast together. He said he'd already eaten a protein bar and needed to get to the office early. I asked if everything was okay. He said everything was fine, but his voice was flat, emotionless. I tried to bring up Mira's dance recital coming up this weekend. I said it would be nice if we could both be there, maybe take her out for ice cream afterward as a family. Garrett said he'd check his calendar and let me know. Then he picked up his coffee and his laptop bag and walked toward the garage. I asked if he was upset about something. He paused in the doorway and looked at me. Really looked at me. And something in his eyes made my stomach twist. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even hurt. It was something colder, something like assessment. He said he wasn't upset. He said he was just focused on work. Then he left. I stood in the kitchen, listening to the garage door rumble open and his car pull out. The house felt too quiet, too empty. Mira came downstairs a few minutes later, still in her pajamas, her dark hair tangled from sleep. She asked where Daddy was. I said he had to go to work early. She asked why Daddy didn't smile anymore. The question hit me harder than I expected. I told her Daddy was just tired and busy. She looked at me with those big hazel eyes, Garrett's eyes, and asked why Mommy and Daddy didn't laugh together anymore. I didn't have an answer for that. After I dropped Mira off at kindergarten, I drove to my office at the event planning company where I worked. I loved my job, the creativity, the problem-solving, the satisfaction of pulling off a perfect event. But lately, even work felt hollow. I was reviewing vendor contracts at my desk when my phone buzzed. A text message. From Lucas. Lucas Brennan was one of Garrett's friends from business school. They'd known each other for years, though I'd only met him a handful of times at parties or dinners. He was attractive, tall, athletic build, easy smile. The kind of man who made you feel like you were the only person in the room when he talked to you. He'd sent me a friend request on social media a few months ago. I'd accepted. We'd exchanged a few casual messages about nothing important, recommendations for restaurants, comments on mutual friends' posts, harmless stuff. But over the past few weeks, the messages had become more frequent, more personal. He'd asked how I was doing, really doing. He'd said I seemed unhappy in my recent photos. He'd suggested we grab coffee sometime to catch up. I'd told myself it was just friendly, that I was reading too much into it, but I'd also felt a little thrill every time his name appeared on my screen. This morning's message read, "Been thinking about our last conversation. When can we meet? I think we need to talk in person." I stared at the message for a long moment. Our last conversation had been 2 days ago. I'd mentioned feeling invisible in my marriage, feeling like Garrett had checked out emotionally. Lucas had said I deserved better, that I deserved to be seen and appreciated. I shouldn't respond. I knew that. This was crossing a line. But my fingers moved across the keyboard anyway. "I'm free this evening. Where did you have in mind?" His response came almost immediately. "Riverside Embankment at 6. We can walk and talk. Private." I typed back, "Okay, see you then." I set my phone down and took a deep breath. It was just a walk, just a conversation. Nothing wrong with that. Around lunchtime, I found Rebecca in the break room. Rebecca Torres was my co-worker and closest friend at the office. She was pouring creamer into her coffee when I sat down across from her. I asked if she had a minute to talk. She said of course and settled into the chair. I told her about Lucas, about the messages, about feeling neglected by Garrett, about how good it felt to have someone pay attention to me, to actually care about how I was feeling. Rebecca listened with wide, sympathetic eyes. She said every woman deserved to feel desired and appreciated. She said if Garrett wasn't giving me that, there was nothing wrong with finding it elsewhere. She said I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just having conversations. I felt validated, relieved. Rebecca understood. She asked if I thought Lucas was interested in more than friendship. I said I didn't know. Maybe. Rebecca said if he was, would I be interested? I hesitated. Then I said I didn't know that either. But maybe I was curious. Rebecca smiled and said there was nothing wrong with being curious. Life was short. Marriage didn't have to mean the end of excitement. That afternoon, I could barely focus on work. I kept checking the clock, watching the minutes creep towards 6. At 5:30, I left the office and drove to the Riverside Embankment. It was one of those perfect early summer evenings, warm but not hot, a gentle breeze coming off the water. The path along the river was popular with joggers and cyclists, but there were quieter stretches where you could walk and talk without being overheard. Lucas was already there when I arrived. He was wearing jeans and a fitted t-shirt that showed off his athletic build. He smiled when he saw me and said I looked great. I felt myself blush. We started walking along the path. The conversation flowed easily. He asked about work, about Mira, about how I was really doing. I found myself opening up more than I'd intended. I told him about the distance between Garrett and me, about feeling like roommates instead of spouses, about wondering if this was all there was. Lucas listened intently. He said he'd noticed the tension between us at the last dinner party. He said I deserved someone who made me feel alive, who made me feel wanted. I said I felt guilty even having this conversation. Lucas said guilt was just conditioning. Society told women they had to be satisfied with whatever they got in marriage. But that wasn't fair. I had needs, desires. There was nothing wrong with acknowledging that. We walked for nearly an hour. As the sun started to set, casting golden light across the water, Lucas stopped and turned to face me. He said he needed to be honest, that he'd been attracted to me since the first time we met years ago, that watching me in an unhappy marriage was painful, that he thought about me constantly. My heart was racing. I said I was married. He said he knew, but marriage to the wrong person was just a cage. I could choose to stay trapped, or I could choose to feel alive again. I looked into his eyes and felt something I hadn't felt in years: desire, want, the thrill of being pursued. He asked if I'd ever thought about what it would be like to be with someone else. I couldn't lie. I said yes, sometimes. Lucas smiled. He said thinking wasn't enough. He'd booked a hotel room downtown for 2 nights from now, Thursday evening. He'd be there at 8 o'clock. If I wanted to stop thinking and start living, I knew where to find him. Then he leaned in close, not quite touching me, but close enough that I could feel the heat of his body, and said he hoped I'd come. He hoped I'd choose myself for once. He walked away, leaving me standing on the embankment with my pulse pounding and my mind racing. I stood there for a long time, watching the sun disappear behind the buildings. What I didn't know was that 50 yards behind me, Garrett had been jogging on the same path. He'd been wearing his running gear and wireless earbuds, but the earbuds weren't just playing music. They were connected to a small recording device clipped to his collar. He'd watched the entire conversation. He'd recorded every word. And when Lucas had leaned in close, Garrett had taken out his phone and snapped a photo. That evening, I came home to find Garrett in his home office. His laptop was open, and he was staring at the screen with that same cold, assessing look. I asked what he was working on. He minimized the screen and said just some financial planning. Nothing important. I noticed the shared family tablet on the kitchen counter. I picked it up to check Mira's school calendar and saw a notification from Garrett's calendar. Downtown 4:15 p.m. Meeting personal. I asked what the downtown meeting was about. He said it was just personal business he needed to take care of. Nothing to worry about, but something in his tone made me uneasy. I went to bed that night unable to sleep. I kept thinking about Lucas, about the hotel room, about the choice I was facing. I told myself I was just considering it. I hadn't made a decision yet. I was allowed to think about it. But deep down, I knew I'd already decided. I was going to go. The next 2 days passed in a blur. I moved through the motions of normal life, work, taking care of Mira, making dinner. But my mind was somewhere else. It was on Thursday night, on room 412 at the Riverside Hotel, on Lucas. Garrett remained distant and cold. He came home late both nights, said he'd eaten at the office, and went straight to the guest room. He barely looked at me, barely spoke to me. Part of me felt guilty, but a bigger part felt justified. If Garrett couldn't even be bothered to have a conversation with me, why should I feel bad about seeking connection elsewhere? On Thursday morning, I took extra care getting ready. I chose my outfit carefully, a dark blue dress that was elegant but fitted. Not too obvious, but flattering. I did my makeup more carefully than usual. I packed a small overnight bag and told myself I'd leave it in the car, just in case. At work, Rebecca asked if I was going through with it. I said I thought so. She said I deserved to feel wanted, to feel alive. She said whatever happened, I shouldn't feel guilty. Garrett had pushed me to this point with his neglect. I left work at 5:30. The hotel was downtown, about 20 minutes from my office. I drove there in a daze, my heart pounding the entire time. I parked in the hotel garage and sat in my car for 10 minutes, gripping the steering wheel, trying to calm my breathing. This was it, the moment of decision. I could turn around right now, go home, pretend this never happened, or I could walk through those doors and choose myself, choose excitement, choose to feel wanted. I got out of the car. I walked through the hotel lobby, trying to look casual. The elevator ride to the 4th floor felt like it took forever. My reflection in the mirrored walls showed a woman I barely recognized, nervous, excited, scared. I found room 412 at the end of the hall. I stood outside the door for a long moment, my hand raised to knock. This was it. I knocked. The door opened almost immediately, but it wasn't Lucas standing there. It was Garrett. For a moment, I couldn't process what I was seeing. My brain couldn't make sense of it. Why was Garrett here? Where was Lucas? Garrett's expression was completely neutral. Cold. Controlled. He said I should come in. His voice was calm, almost clinical. I stepped into the room on shaking legs. My eyes scanned the space. No Lucas. Just Garrett standing there in his work clothes, his laptop open on the desk. On the laptop screen was a web page, a messaging app. My messaging history with Lucas. Every message, every flirtation, every escalation, every agreement to meet here tonight. I felt the blood drain from my face. Garrett gestured to the laptop. He said he wanted to make sure I saw everything, make sure I understood that he knew. Every word, every plan. I tried to speak. I tried to say this wasn't what it looked like, but my voice came out as a whisper. That's when I heard a door open behind me. I spun around. There was an adjoining room. The door between the rooms opened, and 3 people stepped through. Lucas, Garrett's sister Nina, and a man I didn't recognize, older, professional-looking, carrying a camera. Lucas looked at me with something like pity, or maybe disgust. I couldn't tell. I looked back at Garrett. I said I didn't understand. What was happening? Garrett said it was very simple. Lucas had told him weeks ago that I'd been sending flirtatious messages, that I seemed interested in more. Garrett had asked Lucas to help him find out the truth, to see if I would actually go through with it. Lucas had agreed. Every message Lucas sent had been coordinated with Garrett. Every suggestion, every escalation, every invitation. All of it had been a test, a trap, and I'd walked right into it. I tried to say I wasn't actually going to do anything, that I was just curious, that I would have stopped before anything happened. Nina laughed, a short, bitter sound. She said I'd driven to a hotel, dressed up, and knocked on the door of the room where I thought a man was waiting to sleep with me. What exactly would I call that? I said they'd set me up. This wasn't fair. Garrett said fair was being faithful to your spouse. Fair was not planning to cheat. Fair was not lying for weeks while actively pursuing an affair. I said I hadn't actually cheated. Garrett walked to the laptop and clicked a button. A recording started playing. It was my voice. From the Riverside embankment 2 days ago, Lucas asking if I'd ever thought about being with someone else. Me saying yes. Lucas inviting me to the hotel. Me agreeing. My own voice, full of excitement and anticipation, filled the room. Garrett stopped the recording. He said intent mattered. Planning mattered. I'd actively chosen to come here tonight. The only reason I wasn't in bed with Lucas right now was because I'd been stopped, not because I'd made the right choice. The man I didn't recognize introduced himself as a private investigator named Tom Chen. He said he'd been documenting my movements for the past week as part of Garrett's divorce preparation. He took several photos of me standing in the hotel room, evidence that I'd arrived as planned. I felt like I was going to be sick. I asked Garrett how he could do this, how he could trap me like this. He said he didn't trap me, I'd trapped myself. Every message I sent, every agreement I made, every lie I told, those were my choices. He said he'd suspected something was wrong for weeks. The way I was always on my phone. The way I'd become secretive. The emotional distance. He'd checked our family cloud account, the one we both had access to, and seen my messages to Lucas. He could have confronted me then, but he'd wanted to know how far I'd go. Now he knew. Nina asked how I could do this to her brother, how I could plan to betray him with his friend, how I could risk destroying Mira's family. I tried to say I'd felt neglected, that Garrett had been distant, that I just wanted to feel wanted again. Garrett said feeling neglected didn't justify planning adultery. He said if I'd been unhappy, I should have talked to him, should have suggested counseling, should have done literally anything except what I'd done. He walked to his briefcase and pulled out a flash drive. He handed it to me and said it contained copies of everything, all the messages, the recording, the investigator's report, photos, everything. He said I should review it with my attorney, because he was filing for divorce, and all of this would be part of the proceedings. I tried to speak, to explain, to beg, but Garrett held up his hand. He said there was nothing left to say. He said Mira was with his parents tonight. They knew everything. They'd help him explain to her in an age-appropriate way what was happening. He said he'd arranged for temporary living arrangements. He'd stay in the house with Mira, and I should stay with my mother until the custody arrangement was finalized. I felt tears streaming down my face. I said we could work through this, that we could go to counseling, that I'd made a mistake, but we could fix it. Garrett's expression didn't change. He said this wasn't a mistake. A mistake was an accident. This was a series of deliberate choices spanning weeks. This was planning and deception and betrayal. He said he'd see me in court, then he walked out of the hotel room. Nina followed, shooting me one last disgusted look. Lucas shook his head and left without a word. The private investigator handed me his card in case my attorney needed to contact him. Then he left too. I stood alone in that hotel room, holding a flash drive full of evidence of my own planned betrayal. I don't know how long I stood there. Eventually, I left. I walked through the hotel lobby in a daze. In the parking garage, I saw Garrett's car parked a few spaces from mine. I walked over to it and looked through the window. On the passenger seat were 3 folders, neatly labeled: evidence, text messages, evidence recordings, and witness statements. On top of the folders was a sticky note in Garrett's precise handwriting: attorney meeting, Monday 10 a.m. Monday. That was 4 days away. I got in my car and sat there, staring at nothing. My phone buzzed, a text from my mother asking if I could come stay with her for a few days. Garrett had already called her, had already told her everything. I drove to my mother's house in silence. I didn't even remember the drive. I just suddenly found myself in her driveway. She opened the door before I could knock. Her face was a mixture of concern and something else. Disappointment, maybe. She asked if it was true, if I'd really done what Garrett said. I couldn't even answer. I just started crying. She let me in and made tea. We sat at her kitchen table, and I told her everything. About feeling neglected, about Lucas paying attention to me, about the messages and the plan and the hotel room. I expected her to comfort me, to take my side, to say Garrett had been cruel to set me up like that. Instead, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said I'd put her in an impossible position, that she loved me, but what I'd done was wrong, that Garrett hadn't forced me to send those messages or agree to that meeting. Those had been my choices. I felt utterly alone. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment when Garrett opened that hotel room door, the look on his face, the evidence on his laptop. I'd thought I was being smart, careful. I'd thought I was just exploring my options. Instead, I'd been walking into a trap that had been set weeks ago, and I'd brought all the rope they needed to hang me with. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Rebecca. "Is it true? Did Garrett catch you at a hotel?" My stomach dropped. How did Rebecca know? I hadn't told anyone except my mother. I called Rebecca. She answered on the first ring. She said Lucas had told several people at the gym we all went to. He'd told them the whole story, how he'd helped Garrett expose my plan to cheat, how I'd showed up at the hotel room expecting him, how Garrett had been waiting with evidence and witnesses. The story was spreading. Fast. I asked Rebecca to keep it quiet. She said she would, but her voice was different, cooler, more distant. She said she had to go and hung up quickly. I spent the weekend at my mother's house, barely leaving my room. Garrett texted once to say Mira was fine and asking when we could discuss logistics. I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say. On Monday morning, I forced myself to go to the gym. I needed to do something normal, something routine. Maybe exercise would clear my head. In the locker room, I immediately felt the stares. 3 women I vaguely knew were by the sinks, and their conversation stopped the moment I walked in. One of them, Marie, asked directly if it was true about the hotel setup. I tried to deflect. I said it was complicated. She said it seemed pretty simple. Lucas had told everyone I'd been messaging him for weeks, planning to sleep with him, and that Garrett had orchestrated a sting to catch me. I felt my face burn. I said that wasn't the whole story. Marie said then, what was the whole story? I couldn't answer, because the truth was, that basically was the whole story. Another woman said she'd heard Garrett had recordings of me agreeing to the hotel meeting, that he had a private investigator, that he'd documented everything. I stammered something about how I'd been unhappy in my marriage, that Garrett had been emotionally distant, that I'd just wanted to feel appreciated. Marie looked at me with something like pity. She said lots of people were unhappy in their marriages. That didn't justify cheating. And planning to cheat was basically the same thing. It showed what was in your heart. The third woman said her sister had gone through a messy divorce. That evidence, like what Garrett had collected, could destroy someone in custody proceedings. That judges took intent very seriously. I felt panic rising in my chest. I hadn't thought about custody. Not really. Mira was my daughter. Courts favored mothers, didn't they? But looking at these women's faces, at their judgment and disapproval, I realized maybe I'd been naive. I left the gym without working out. That evening, Garrett's parents invited me to dinner. I didn't want to go, but Garrett texted saying Mira would be there, and we needed to discuss arrangements. I couldn't avoid it forever. The dinner was at a family restaurant downtown. Garrett's parents, Francine and Douglas, had reserved a private room. When I arrived, they were already there with Garrett, Nina, and Mira. Mira ran to me when she saw me. I hugged her tight, breathing in the smell of her shampoo, feeling tears burn my eyes. She asked when I was coming home. I said soon, sweetie, soon. But Garrett's face told a different story. We sat down at the long table. The atmosphere was heavy, oppressive. No one was pretending this was a normal family dinner. Francine started the conversation. She said she'd seen the evidence, that Garrett had shown them the messages, played them the recording. She said she was disappointed, that she'd thought better of me. I tried to defend myself. I said I'd been unhappy, that Garrett had been cold and distant, that I'd felt abandoned in my own marriage. Douglas asked if I'd tried talking to Garrett about my feelings before messaging his friend. I hesitated. I said I'd tried, but Garrett was always working. Garrett spoke for the first time. He said that was a lie. He said I'd never once said I was unhappy or suggested counseling. He said the first he knew of any problem was when Lucas told him I'd been sending inappropriate messages. Nina jumped in. She said she'd seen the messages too, that they weren't just innocent complaints about being unhappy. They were flirtatious, sexual, excited. She said I'd told Lucas I'd been thinking about him constantly, that I couldn't wait to see him, that I was tired of being good. My face burned. Those messages existed. I'd written them. I couldn't deny it. Francine said she wanted to understand. She asked if I'd considered Mira at all when I agreed to meet Lucas, if I'd thought about what it would do to her family if I'd gone through with it. I said of course I'd thought about Mira. I said I loved her more than anything. Francine asked, then how could I risk destroying her family for a fling? I didn't have an answer. Douglas said they'd consulted with their attorney, a family friend who specialized in divorce and custody cases. He said given the evidence Garrett had collected, I should prepare for a difficult custody battle. He said intent to commit adultery, even when interrupted, demonstrated poor judgment. That combined with the weeks of deception and lying showed a pattern of behavior that courts considered when determining what was best for a child. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I said I was Mira's mother, that I'd always put her first. Nina laughed bitterly and said the evidence showed otherwise. Mira was sitting quietly, playing with her food, not understanding the adult conversation, but sensing the tension. She looked up at me and asked when Mommy and Daddy would stop being sad. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Garrett said they'd stop being sad when everyone was settled in their new routines. That sometimes families changed, but everyone still loved her very much. I tried to catch Garrett's eye, to communicate silently that we needed to talk privately. He didn't look at me. After dinner, Garrett walked me to my car. I tried to talk to him. I said we could work through this, that we could go to counseling, that I knew I'd made a terrible mistake, but our marriage was worth fighting for. He said there was no marriage left to fight for, that the moment I agreed to meet Lucas at that hotel, I'd ended it. He said all that was left now was paperwork and logistics. I asked when I could see Mira. He said we'd work out a visitation schedule through our attorneys. I said I didn't have an attorney yet. He said I should get one immediately. Then he got in his car and drove away, leaving me standing in the parking lot. I sat in my car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel. My phone buzzed, a text from a number I didn't recognize. Just a photo. It was a screenshot from social media. Nina had changed her profile picture to one of her Garrett and Mira at the beach. I'd taken that photo last summer, but I'd been cropped out. The message that accompanied it, actions have consequences. I realized then how completely I'd underestimated what was happening. This wasn't just Garrett being angry. This wasn't just a fight we'd eventually get over. This was war, and I'd already lost the first battle. The next few days blurred together. I called in sick to work, unable to face Rebecca or anyone else who might have heard the story. I stayed at my mother's house, barely eating, barely sleeping. My mother tried to be supportive, but even she was conflicted. She said she loved me, but couldn't condone what I'd done. She said she'd talk to Garrett, try to smooth things over. I told her not to bother. Garrett wasn't going to change his mind. Late Wednesday night, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to know what Garrett was planning. I needed to see what evidence he'd actually collected. I drove to the house, my house, though it didn't feel like mine anymore. Garrett's car wasn't in the driveway. I used my key to get in, my heart pounding. The house was dark and quiet. I knew Mira was with Garrett's parents for the week. I went straight to Garrett's home office. The room was immaculate as always. Garrett was meticulous about organization. His desk was clear, except for his laptop and a small desk lamp. I tried to open the laptop, but it was password protected with a password I didn't know. He'd changed it. I tried the desk drawers. The top two opened easily, just office supplies and old files, but the bottom drawer was locked. I searched the desk for a key. Nothing. I went to the kitchen and found a letter opener, then came back and worked the lock. It took several minutes, but eventually the drawer clicked open. Inside was a folder, a thick one. I pulled it out and opened it with shaking hands. The first page was a printed timeline. My affair, except it wasn't even an affair because nothing had actually happened, laid out in clinical detail. March 15th, Lucas Brennan sends friend request to live Ashford, accepted same day. March 22nd, first direct message exchange, casual conversation about restaurants. April 3, Liv initiates conversation about feeling underappreciated in marriage. April 10th, Lucas expresses attraction, Liv responds positively. On and on, every message, every interaction, dated and time-stamped. Behind the timeline were printed screenshots, pages and pages of them. My messages to Lucas, his responses, every escalation, every flirtation, every agreement meticulously documented. I saw my own words on those pages, words I'd written in private moments, thinking they'd disappear, thinking they were secret. I can't stop thinking about you. Garrett doesn't make me feel this way anymore. I know this is wrong, but it feels so right. I want to see you, alone. Reading them in black and white, in this sterile folder, they looked different than they'd felt when I wrote them. They looked calculated, intentional, damning. Behind the screenshots was a transcript. I realized it was the recording from the Riverside embankment, every word of that conversation between Lucas and me, transcribed and printed. Then there was a document titled Witness Statement, Lucas Brennan. In it, Lucas described how Garrett had approached him after discovering the messages, how Garrett had asked for help determining if Liv would actually follow through with physical infidelity, how Lucas had agreed to escalate the flirtation and extend the hotel invitation, how Liv had agreed enthusiastically and arrived at the appointed time. There was a report from the private investigator, Tom Chen. It included surveillance photos, me arriving at the hotel, entering the building, walking down the fourth-floor hallway, time-stamped, dated, undeniable. At the back of the folder were notes in Garrett's handwriting. They were organized by topic: custody, established pattern of deception, and poor judgment, demonstrate that Liv's choices prioritize personal desire over child's welfare. Use intent to commit adultery as evidence of moral unfitness. Financial, freeze joint accounts, establish separate household account, document all expenses. Legal, consult with Catherine Merrick, recommended by Dad's attorney friend. File for divorce citing intent to commit adultery. Request primary physical custody with supervised visitation pending evaluation. I felt sick. This wasn't just documentation, this was strategy, a comprehensive plan to destroy me in divorce proceedings. I took out my phone and started photographing pages. I needed copies. I needed to know what I was up against. I was halfway through when I heard a sound. The front door opening. I froze. Garrett was home. I quickly closed the folder and shoved it back in the drawer, trying to push it closed. But the lock was broken now. It wouldn't latch. I heard footsteps in the hallway. Garrett appeared in the office doorway. He looked at me, at the broken drawer, at my phone in my hand. His expression didn't change. He asked what I was doing here. I said I needed to get some of my things. He said I should have called first. That breaking into locked drawers was illegal. I said this was my house too. He said not for much longer. He walked to the desk and opened the drawer. He pulled out the folder and flipped through it, checking that everything was there. Then he looked at me and said, I shouldn't have come here. That everything in this folder would be submitted to the court regardless. That stealing or photographing it wouldn't help my case. I asked how he could be so cold, so calculating. He said he wasn't cold. He was protecting himself and his daughter. He said I'd made my choices, and now he was making his. He told me to leave. I refused. I said we needed to talk. He pulled out his phone and said if I didn't leave voluntarily, he'd call the police and report me for trespassing and breaking and entering. I left. The next day was Mira's dance recital. I'd been looking forward to it for weeks. Mira had been practicing her routine every night. She was so excited. I arrived at the community center where the recital was being held. The hall was packed with parents and grandparents, everyone chatting and taking photos. I saw Garrett immediately. He was sitting with his parents and Nina in the third row. He didn't acknowledge me. I found a seat near the back. As soon as I sat down, I felt the stares. Other parents looking at me, then quickly looking away. Whispers behind hands. A mother I'd chatted with at previous school events saw me and immediately moved to sit on the other side of the hall. During intermission, I went to the lobby to get some air. That's when Nina approached. She didn't lower her voice. She didn't try to be subtle. She asked how I could show my face here, how I could act like nothing had happened. She said everyone knew, that Lucas had told people, that Garrett's family had told people, that the whole community knew I'd tried to cheat on Garrett with his friend. Other parents were watching now, some pretending not to listen, others openly staring. I tried to respond quietly. I said this wasn't the time or place. Nina said there would never be a time or place where what I did was acceptable. She said Garrett had been nothing but a good husband and father, that I'd thrown it all away because I was selfish and bored. She said I didn't deserve Mira, that Garrett would fight for full custody, and she'd help him every step of the way. I felt tears burning in my eyes. I said I was still Mira's mother. Nina said, being a mother required putting your child first, something I'd clearly failed to do. Then she turned and walked back into the auditorium. I stood in the lobby, surrounded by staring parents, feeling completely exposed and humiliated. When the recital resumed, I watched Mira perform her dance. She was beautiful, graceful, perfect. She smiled the whole time. Afterward, she ran to Garrett first. He scooped her up and spun her around, telling her how amazing she was, His parents and Nina crowded around, praising her, taking photos. I approached slowly. Mira saw me and reached out. I hugged her and told her how proud I was. She asked if I was coming home now. I said not yet, but soon. Garrett gently took Mira's hand and said it was time to go. Mira protested, saying she wanted Mommy to come too. Garrett said Mommy had other things to do tonight. As they walked away, I saw Garrett's phone light up in his pocket. Just a glimpse, but enough to see a message thread titled Follow Up and a preview. Documents prepared. Confirm service date. My stomach dropped. Service date. That meant legal papers. Soon. I tried to follow them to the parking lot, but Francine blocked my path. She said I'd done enough damage for one day, that I should go home and prepare myself for what was coming. I asked what she meant. She said Garrett had been very clear with them, that he was filing for divorce with full documentation, that he'd be requesting primary custody, that I'd better find a good attorney because this was going to be brutal. I said I was Mira's mother. She said mothers put their children first. She asked if I'd thought about Mira when I was messaging Lucas, when I was planning to meet him at a hotel, when I was about to destroy her family. I had no answer. Francine walked away, leaving me standing in the parking lot alone. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that message preview. Documents prepared. Confirm service date. When was he going to serve me? Where? How? I needed to know what was coming. I needed to prepare. But I had no idea how to fight something so meticulously planned and documented. The next morning, I woke up determined to talk to Garrett, to reason with him, to make him understand that we could work through this. I waited until evening, when I knew he'd be home from work. I drove to the house and found him on the balcony, looking out over the backyard where Mira's swing set stood empty. I stepped outside and closed the sliding door behind me. I said we needed to talk, really talk. Garrett didn't turn around. He said there was nothing to talk about. I said we'd been married for 7 years. We had a daughter. Our marriage was worth fighting for. He turned to face me then. His expression was calm but final. He said the marriage ended the moment I agreed to meet Lucas at that hotel, that everything before that moment was built on a foundation I'd chosen to destroy, that there was no rebuilding from betrayal this calculated. I said I never actually cheated, that I'd been stopped before anything happened. That should count for something. Garrett said intent mattered, planning mattered. I'd actively pursued this for weeks. I'd lied to him every day. I'd arranged to meet another man in a hotel room. The only reason it hadn't happened was because he'd stopped it, not because I'd made the right choice. I tried a different approach. I said we needed to think about Mira, about keeping her family together. Garrett's expression hardened. He said he was thinking about Mira. That's all he'd been thinking about. He said she deserved a parent who modeled honesty and integrity, who put her needs first, who made good choices even when it was hard. He said everything from here forward would be handled properly, through legal channels, through attorneys and courts. He said I'd receive formal notification of proceedings soon. I asked when. He said when it was time. Then he walked back into the house, leaving me alone on the balcony. The next day, I went to the supermarket to pick up a few things. I was in the checkout line when I heard my name. Francine was standing 2 lanes over. She walked toward my line, and I felt a sense of dread. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. She said she wanted to make something very clear. She said Mira would need stability and protection in the coming months, that Garrett would ensure she had both. I said I was Mira's mother, that I'd always put her first. Francine's eyes were cold. She said if I'd put Mira first, I wouldn't have risked destroying her family. She said Garrett had consulted with child psychologists about the best custody arrangement to minimize trauma. She said I should prepare myself for supervised visitation. I felt panic rising. I said supervised visitation was for dangerous parents, for addicts or abusers. I'd never hurt Mira. Francine said there were different kinds of harm. That demonstrating poor judgment, prioritizing personal desires over family stability, and engaging in deceptive behavior all showed a pattern that courts considered when determining a child's best interests. She said I should get a good attorney, that this was going to be difficult. Then she paid for her groceries and left. I abandoned my cart and walked out of the store in a daze. That evening, I needed to clear my head. I took the metro downtown, thinking I'd walk around, maybe get coffee, try to think clearly about what to do next. I was standing on the platform waiting for the train when I saw him. Garrett was on the same platform, about 30 feet away. He wasn't alone. There was a woman with him, late 40s, professional-looking, carrying a leather briefcase. They were deep in conversation, reviewing documents together. The woman was pointing to specific sections, and Garrett was nodding, occasionally making notes on a tablet. I moved closer, trying to hear what they were discussing without being obvious. I caught fragments. The woman mentioned filing deadlines, procedures, temporary orders, custody schedules. This had to be his attorney. Garrett's phone lit up with a text. The preview was visible for just a moment before he swiped it away. Service scheduled for Friday at 11 a.m. Location confirmed. Friday. That was tomorrow, at 11 a.m. I felt my heart racing. Where? What location? The train arrived. Garrett and the woman boarded, still discussing the documents. Garrett never looked in my direction, never acknowledged my presence, even though I was certain he'd seen me. Through the train window, I watched them sit down and continue their conversation. Garrett opened a folder on his tablet. I could just barely make out the label. Final service copy. The train pulled away. I stood on the platform, my mind racing. Service tomorrow at 11 a.m. But where? I tried calling Garrett, straight to voicemail. I tried texting. No response. I called my mother. She said she hadn't heard anything. I asked if she could help me find an attorney. She said she'd make some calls, but it might take a few days. I didn't have a few days. Whatever was coming tomorrow. I went back to my mother's house and spent the night pacing, checking my phone every few minutes, waiting for some notification or clue about what was going to happen. At 10:30 the next morning, I still had no information. I decided to go to my office. At least there I could try to get some work done, try to maintain some normalcy. I drove downtown and parked in the building's garage. My office was on the 15th floor. I took the elevator to the lobby, planning to stop at the coffee shop on the ground floor before heading up to my office. That's when I saw him. Garrett was standing near the security desk with the woman from the metro platform and two other people I didn't recognize. One was a man in his 60s carrying a clipboard. The other was Lucas. My blood turned to ice. They were here, at my office building, and it was 10:55 a.m., 5 minutes to 11. I froze in the lobby. Garrett, his attorney. Lucas, a process server with a clipboard. Catherine Merrick approached, introduced herself, handed me the envelope. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Grounds, intent to commit adultery. Pages spilled out. Every text, the Riverside transcript, hotel photos, Lucas's statement, PI report. Temporary orders. Garrett got primary custody of Mira. Supervised visits for me. Frozen accounts. 30 days to vacate the house under supervision. Lucas, you planned it. You showed up ready. Catherine, no entrapment. You chose. Nina and Francine flanked Garrett. Mira deserves better. Garrett's first words. Love protects her from chaos. All contact through counsel. They left. Co-workers stared. Phones out. Texts. Merrick's office. Direct contact. Protective order. Mom. Mira stays with Garrett's parents. First visit Wednesday. Supervised. I clutched the proof. My words, my lies, my intent. The trap wasn't the hotel. It was believing I could justify betrayal. Elevator doors closed on my reflection. A woman who gambled her family and lost. 15th floor. New normal. ashes, and evidence. I'd chosen every step. Now I'd live with the fall. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.